Yes, it's that time of the month when we talk about interesting words and phrases I've discovered whilst reading in a foreign language, and any other news and interesting things I want to talk about. I've decided to make this into a monthly podcast instead of what I was doing before, and it's going to be called News, Views, and Foreign Language Clues, because I needed to make it rhyme. I'll be adding last month's into the same playlist, even though it won't be formatted the same. I'll post it around the middle of the month, but I'm not going to fix which week, at least at the moment. Okay, let's get on with the news and views. I'm starting by talking about the Sanremo Music Festival. So, those of you in the know might well have watched the Sanremo Festival on TV, which takes place in Italy. It's basically a music contest, and the winner is usually the entry for the Eurovision Song Contest. At the time of recording, it hasn't happened yet, because I recorded at the beginning of the previous month. However, one thing is certain, all the songs that were part of the festival, all 30 of them, that's already been announced, will be the principal songs in the Italian charts for the next several months. The other thing that is almost certain is that there will be a wide variety of music styles and performers of all ages. What this means is that finding a playlist with all the songs from the festival on it is the perfect place to find performers and songs you might want to listen to. Spotify definitely has a playlist each year. I'll link to that below. I'm sure the other music streaming platforms will too. So if you're trying to get into Italian music and don't know where to start, go and find one of those playlists. Once you've selected your favourites, you'll start getting similar artists recommended. Another short thing about Italian I discovered in the past month. This word. I was pronouncing it qui, but I heard someone say it in a podcast and I thought, that's odd. And I looked it up, and I discovered that it is actually pronounced cui, with the stress on the U, making that two vowels, I guess, separate syllables. Cui. I mean, it's quite quick. Cui. But it does sound different. Thinking about it, this makes sense because it makes it distinct from qui. Will I forget that in the future when reading things out? Maybe. Let's hope not. Now let's talk about Amazon. I noticed recently that they're starting to put language categories on the site so that you can search for books in a certain language. I even saw this when I went back into Amazon to get a screenshot. Recommendations for a specific language in one of my favourite genres. But this was what I was aiming for. I selected fantasy books, and in the list down the side I could select all these languages, which are presumably the most regularly searched in the UK. Obviously most of them are European languages, plus Polish, because there are a lot of Polish people in the UK. And I guess Korean, because all the music and drama series have been popular, so why not books? But it does change depending on what you're looking at, so maybe it's just what's available. All this to say you might have this in your country, which might make it a heck of a lot easier to find foreign language books in the future. Although at the moment, results seem to be mixed. They may not have everything categorised correctly yet. And finally, in this random selection of news and views, it's weird how some words just stick, don't you think? Even though they're not really common. I was reading in Spanish and murciélago came up, and I knew immediately what it was. A bat, as in the animal. Clearly, I learnt that word when I was in education at some point, many, many years ago. Do I know what a bat is in any other language? No. Why did that stick? Damned if I know. I never talk about bats, but I potentially could in Spanish. Okay, words and phrases. Let's start with Spanish as we're there already. If you're only interested in one of the others, there are timestamps below. Un viejo lobo de mar. An old wolf of the sea. Meaning someone well versed in sailing on the ocean and generally older. I've never heard wolf used in British English. We usually call these people a dog, as in an old sea dog. But they can also be referred to as a sea salt or similar. although I don't think the latter's really used much these days. Not that dogs or wolves are particularly seafaring, I would have thought. Como moscas a la miel, like flies to honey. Although I'm sure flies would congregate around honey in nature, methinks they'd have a hard time getting into a hive. We usually say as a bee to honey, which it seems also exists in Spanish. Como abejas a la miel. Mirar de hito en hito. Nope, couldn't guess this one without looking it up. De hito en hito is actually from milestone to milestone, but when you attach it to mirar, it becomes to look in the eye, to look from one to the other, or to stare. ¿Qué más da? What more gives? Not exactly. It seems to have quite a few options though, so what I found was, who cares, what does it matter, what's the point, and never mind. La boca de su estómago. The mouth of his or her stomach? What? That's a bit weird. It's weird even when you know that it's the equivalent of the pit of one's stomach, because the mouth says opening to me, and the pit says the depths. Stomach mouth brings up a really weird image in the mind, don't you think? And finally, la araña. Yes, I know it's a spider, but what else is it? Well, it's a chandelier, so not an everyday word. I guess both of them can be found on a ceiling, and a chandelier might look a bit like a spider's web. Anyway, you'll have to gauge which one is more appropriate if you see it. Right, time for some Italian. What do you think il viva voce is? The live voice? You'd definitely guess this if you saw it in context. It's a speakerphone or just hands-free. So parlare con il viva voce would be to speak hands-free. But what is a video call? That's a videochiamata, or una chiamata video. Videochiamata feels more awkward to say to me, but it's a much more popular option on reverso context. Un fuoco di paglia. Well, paglia is straw, so a straw fire. That makes sense, but it might not mean that, because this is a saying for a flash in the pan, a wild goose chase, or one that I would never use, although I actually heard someone using it on YouTube after having drafted this. A nothing burger. I think it might be an American thing, that one. Would you use a nothing burger? We all know that un nome is a first name and un cognome is a surname. But what's a soprannome? There's probably only one obvious possibility left. Yes, it's a nickname. What is pettegolezzo? I see this one quite often when reading, because everyone's always doing it. Pette sounds a little bit like petty, which kind of fits. But come closer. Let me whisper in your ear. It's some nice, juicy gossip. In vita. In life or alive, right? Not always. If I said stretto in vita, what then? That would be cinched at the waist. I've seen it with various clothing type verbs attached, so I think that's probably how you're likely to see it, because otherwise it might be confusing. But yes, la vita is also the waist or waistline. Who knew? Did you? Not one of those things you automatically learn as a body part. Seguire a ruota. Well, ruota is a wheel, but this probably isn't going to be about a vehicle, though I guess it could be. It's to follow on the heels of, join in, to be right behind. Interestingly, aruoto on its own is listed as an adjective for skater, such as a skater dress or wheel-like. Is that just because skateboards are on wheels? Time for some French. I don't have quite so many of these this time. Je m'en veux. You might be more likely to see these words in a different order with another verb after them, such as je veux m'en aller, I want to go, leave, etc. But this particular construction means I feel bad, I'm sorry, I blame myself. Definitely something you might see in a book or hear in a TV drama, as evidenced by one of the sentences that came up on Reverso Context. Je m'en veux de l'avoir tué, which definitely sounds like a sentence from either of the above. Hors pair. Hors, of course, is outside, but pair, that has a number of meanings, but one of them is parallel. So hors pair is outside of being parallel. In other words, unparalleled. And finally, what is un quadragénaire? Well, there's a hint of 4 in there. This is a term for a 40-year-old, but why might someone use this instead of just saying 40 using 40? Because this can mean something a little more general, I think. Someone in their 40s, or middle-aged, or 40-something. And it could be made female just by changing un to une.